Yeah, you said that the cookie banner is a monument for why Europe is losing, is doing the worst of all the regions in tech.
It's it's a monument to good intentions leading straight to hell. And the Europe is actually world class
Yeah.
in good intentions leading straight to hell.
So hell is the cookie accept button. They have to accept all cookies. That's what hell looks like. Over and over. You don't actually ever get to the web
Just
page.
on a human scale, try to imagine how many hours every day are wasted clicking that away, and how much harm we've done to the web as a platform that people enjoy because of them. The internet is ugly in part because of cookie banners. Cookie banners were supposed to save us from advertisement, and advertisement can make the web ugly. There's plenty of examples of that. But cookie banners made the entire internet ugly in one fell swoop. And that's a complete tragedy. But what's even worse, and this is why I call it out as a monument to everything the EU gets wrong, is that we have known this for a decade. No one anywhere who's serious believes that cookie banners does anything good for anyone, yet we've been unable to get rid of it. There's this one piece of legislation that's now, I think, 10 or 12 years old. It's a complete failure on every conceivable metric. Everyone hates it universally, yet we can't seem to do anything about it. That's a bankruptcy declaration for any body of bureaucrats who pretend to make things better for not just citizens, but people around the world. This is the thing that really gets me about cookie banners too. It's not just the EU. It's the entire world. You can't hide from cookie banners anywhere on this planet. If you go to goddamn Mars on one of Elon's rockets and you try to access a webpage, you'll still see a cookie banner. No one in the universe is safe from this nonsense.
Probably the interface on
It'll
the
be
rocket.
slower. You'll have basically a 150-second ping time. So it'll take you 45 seconds just to get through the cookie banners from Mars.
All right, let's walk back up the stack of this recursive tangents we've been taking. So Chrome, we should say, at least in my opinion, is not winning unfairly. It's winning in the fair way by just being better.
It is. If I was going to steelman the other side just for a half second, people would say, well, maybe yes. Most people do sort of begrudgingly agree that Chrome is a pretty good browser. But then they'll say the reason they got dominance was distribution. And the reason they got distribution was because Google also controls Android and therefore can make Chrome the default browser on all these phones. Now, I don't buy that. And the reason I don't buy that is because on Android, you're actually allowed to ship a different browser that has a browser engine that's not the same as Chrome, unlike on iOS, where if you want to ship a browser, Chrome, for example, ships for iOS, but it's not Chrome. It's Safari wrapped in a dress. And every single alternative browser on iOS have to use the Safari web engine. That's not competition. That's not what happened on Android. Again, I think there are some nuances to it, but if you zoom out and you look at all the problems we have with big tech, Chrome is not it. Chrome won on merits. I begrudgingly have switched to Chrome on that realization alone. As a web developer, I just prefer it. I like Firefox in many ways. I like the ethos of it, but Chrome is a better browser than Firefox, full stop.
And by the way, we've never mentioned Edge. Edge is also a good browser.
Because it's also Chrome in a dress.
But it never gets the love. I don't think I've ever used Bing. And I'm sure Bing is really nice.
Maybe you have, because you know what is Bing in a dress?
What?
DuckDuckGo. Which is actually the search engine that I use. DuckDuckGo gets its search results from Bing. Or at least it used to. If they changed that, that would be news to me.
Well, maybe everything is just a wrap or a dress. Everything is wearing a dress. Underneath, there's some other...
There's some
turtles,
of that.
Turtles, all the dresses all the way down. Okay, what were we talking about? We got there from JavaScript and from you learning how to program. So eventually, the big success story is when you built a bunch of stuff with PHP and you were like actually shipping things.
Yes.
And that's when the Ruby story came. So what your big love affair with programming began there. So can you take me there? What is Ruby? Tell the story of Ruby. Explain Ruby to me.
PHP was what converted me from just being able to fondle HTML and turn out some web pages to actually being able to produce web applications myself. So I owe a tremendous gratitude to PHP in that regard. But I never thought of PHP as a calling. I never thought, I'm a professional programmer who writes PHP. That's who I am and that's what I do. I thought of PHP as a tool. I needed to smack the computer with until it produced web applications I wanted. It was very much a means to an end. I didn't fall in love with PHP. I'm very grateful that it taught me the basics of programming, and I'm very grateful that it set the bar for the economics, but it really wasn't until Ruby that I started thinking of myself as a programmer. And the way that came about was that the first time I ever got hired as a professional programmer to write code was actually by Jason Fried, my business partner still. All the way back in 2001, I had been working on these gaming websites in PHP for essentially 18 months at that point. No one had been paying me to do code in that regard. And I connect with Jason Fried over an email sent from Copenhagen, Denmark to Chicago, Illinois, to a person who didn't know who I was. I was just offering solicited advice. Jason had asked a question on the internet, and I had sent him the answer, and he was asking in PHP. And I'd send him the answer to that question, and we started talking, and then we started working, which, by the way, is a miracle of what the internet can allow. How can a kid in Copenhagen who's never met this guy in Chicago connect just over email and start working together? And by the way, we're still working together now, 24 years later. That's incredible. But we started working together, and we started working together on some client projects. Jason would do the design, 37 Signals would do the design, I would bring the programming in PHP. And after we worked on, I think, 2 or 3 client projects together in PHP, we kept hitting the same problem, that whenever you work with a client, you start that project off in email. Oh yeah, let's work together, here's what we're building, and you start trading more and more emails, and before a few weeks have passed, you got to add someone to the project. They don't have the emails. They don't have the context. You send them, where's the latest file? Oh, I've uploaded on the FTP. It's like final V06 2.0, right? That's the one to get. It's just a mess. A beautiful mess in some ways. A mess that still runs the vast majority of projects to this day. Mm-hmm. Email is the lowest common denominator. That's wonderful. But we had dropped the ball a couple of times in serious ways with customers, and we thought, we can do better. We know how to make web applications. Can't we just make a system that's better than email for managing projects? It can't be that hard. We've been doing blogs. We've been doing to-do lists. Let's put some of these things together and just make a system where everything that anyone involved in the project needs is on one page. And it has to be simple enough that I'm not going to run a seminar teaching you how to use the system. I'm just going to give you the login code. You're going to jump into it. So that's Basecamp. And when we started working on Basecamp, I, for the first time in the experience I had with Jason, had the freedom of technology choice. There was no client telling me, yeah, PHP, that sounds good. We know PHP. Can you build it in PHP? Mm-hmm. I had free reins. And at that time, I'd been reading IEEE magazine and a couple of other magazines back from the early 2000s, where Dave Thomas and Martin Fowler had been writing about programming patterns and how to write better code. And these two guys in particular were both using Ruby to explain their concepts because Ruby looked like pseudocode. Whether you were programming in C or Java or PHP, all 3 constituencies could understand Ruby because it basically just reads like English. So these guys were using Ruby to describe their concepts. And first of all, I would read these articles for just the concepts they were explaining. And I'd be like, what is this programming language? I mean, I like the concept you're explaining, but I also want to see the programming language. Why haven't I heard of this? So I started looking into Ruby. And I realized at that time, Ruby might not be known by anyone, but it's actually been around for a long time. Mats, the Japanese creator of Ruby, had started working on Ruby back in 93, before the internet was even a thing. And here I am in 2003, 10 years later, picking up what seems like this hidden gem that's just laying in obscurity in plain sight. But Dave Thomas and Martin Fowler, I think, successfully put me and a handful of other people on the trail of a programming language that hadn't been used much in the West, but could be. So I picked up Ruby and I thought, this is very different. First of all, where are all the semicolons? I'd been programming in PHP, in ASP, I'd even done some Pascal, I'd looked at some C. There were semicolons everywhere. And that was the first thing that struck me is, where are the damn semicolons? And I started thinking, actually, why do we have semicolons in programming? They're to tell the interpreter that there's a new line of instructions, but I don't need him as a human. How? Oh, someone is looking out for the human here. not for the machine. So that really got me interested. And then I thought to myself, do you know what? I know PHP quite well. I'm not an amazing programmer. I haven't been working in programming for all that long, but maybe I can figure it out. I'm going to give myself 2 weeks. I'm going to write a proof of concept where I talk to a database, I pull some records, I format them a bit, and I display them on an HTML page. Can I figure that out in a couple of weeks? It took about 1 weekend, and I was completely mesmerized. I was completely mind blown because Ruby was made for my brain like a perfect tailored glove by someone I'd never met. Like, how is this even possible?
We should say maybe like paint the picture of the certain qualities that Ruby has, maybe even compared to PHP. We should also say that there's a ridiculous thing that I'm used to that I forget about, that there's dollar signs everywhere.
Yes.
PHP.
Yes.
I mean,
there's line noise. That's what I like to call it.
Line noise. Line noise. That's such a beautiful phrase. Yeah. So there's all these things that look like programs. And with Ruby, I mean, there's some similarities in Python there. It just looks kind of like natural language. You can read it normally.
Here's a while loop that does 5 iterations. You can literally type the number 5 dot. Now I'm calling a method under number 5, by the way. That's one of the beautiful aspects of Ruby, that primitives like integers are also objects. And you can call 5 dot times start brackets. Now you're iterating over the code in that bracket 5 times. That's it.
Okay, that's nice.
That's not just nice, that's exceptional. There's literally no other programming language that I know of that has managed to boil away the line noise that almost every other programming language would inject into a 5-time iteration over a block of code to that extent.
That's a really nice, thank you for giving that example. That's a beautiful example. Wow, I don't think I know a programming language that does that. That's really nice.
Ruby is full of that. And so let me dive into a couple of examples, because I really think it helps paint the picture. And let me preface this by saying I like the ethos of Python. I think the Ruby and the Python community share a lot of similarities. They're both dynamic, interpreted languages. They're both focused on immediacy and productivity and ease of use in a bunch of ways. But then they're also very different in many other ways. And one of the ways they're very different is aesthetically. Python, to me, I hope I don't offend people too much. I've said this before. It's ugly. And it's ugly in its base because it's full of superfluous instructions that are necessary for legacy reasons of when Guido made Python back in 87 that are still here in 2025, and my brain can't cope with that. Let me give you a basic example. When you make a class in Python, the initializer method, the starting method, is def. Okay, fair enough. That's actually the same as Ruby. DEF, definition of a method. Then it is underscore. Not 1, underscore 2, init, underscore, parentheses start, self, comma, and then the first argument.
Yeah, the whole self thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I look at that and go, I'm sorry, I'm out. I can't do it. Everything about it offends my sensibilities to the core. Here you have the most important method that all new objects or classes have to implement. And it is one of the most aesthetically offensive ways of typing initialize that I've ever seen anywhere. And you guys are okay with this?
Yeah, you're making me, you know, you're like talking about my marriage or something like this. And I'm now realizing I've been in a toxic relationship all along. Yeah, I just get used to it.
That, to me, by the way, was the magic of Ruby. It opened my eyes to how beautiful programs could be. I didn't know. I'd been working in ASP, I'd been working in PHP. I didn't even have the concept that aesthetics, beautiful code, was something we could optimize for, that's something we could pursue, and even more than that we could pursue it above other objectives. That Ruby is as beautiful as it is not an accident, and it's not easy. Ruby itself is implemented in C. It's very difficult to parse Ruby code because Ruby is written for humans, and humans are messy creatures. They like things in just the right way. I can't fully explain why the underscore init make me repulse, but it does. And when I look at the Ruby alternative, it's really instructive. So it's def, same part, def, space, initialize, parentheses. Not even parentheses. If you don't need to call it within the arguments, there's not even a parentheses. That in itself is actually also a major part. If the human doesn't need the additional characters, we're not just going to put them in because it'd be nicer to parse for the computer. We're going to get rid of the semicolons. We're going to get rid of the parentheses. We're going to get rid of the underscores. We're going to get rid of all that ugliness, all the line noise, and boil it down to its pure essentials. And at the same time, we're not going to abbreviate. This is a key difference in the aesthetics between Ruby and Python as well. Init is shorter to type. It's only 5 characters. Initialize is a lot longer, but it looks a lot better. And you don't type it very often, so you should look at something pretty. If you don't have to do it all the time, it's okay that it's long. Those kinds of aesthetic evaluations are rife all over the Ruby language. But let me give you an even better example. The if conditional. That's the bedrock of all programming languages. They have the if conditional. If you take most programming languages, they all have if. That's basically the same in almost every language. Space, start parentheses. We all did that. And then you have, perhaps, let's say you're calling a object called user dot is admin, close parentheses, start brackets, and here's what we're going to do if the user's an admin, right? That would be a normal programming language. Ruby doesn't do it like that. Ruby boils almost all of it away. We start with the if. Okay, that's the same. No parentheses necessary because there's no ambiguity for the human to distinguish that the next part is just a single statement. So you do if space user dot admin question mark.
Yeah.
No open brackets, no parentheses, no nothing. Next open line, here's your conditional. That question mark means nothing to the computer, but it means something to the human. Ruby put in the predicate method style purely as a communication tool between humans. It's actually more work for the interpreter to be able to see that this question mark is in. Why is this question mark in here? Because it just reads so nicely. If user admin question mark. That's a very human phrase, but it gets better. You can turn this around. You can have your statement you want to execute before the conditional. You can do user.upgrade. Say you're calling an upgrade method on a user. Space if space user.admin question mark. We do the thing if the thing is true. Instead of saying if the thing is true, do the thing. But it gets even better. This is why I love this example with the conditional, because you can keep diving into it. So let's flip it around. User.downgrade if exclamation point not user.admin, right? That'd be a typical way of writing it. Ruby goes, that exclamation point is line noise. Why do we have if and then an exclamation point? That's ugly. We could do user.downgrade unless user admin question mark. That to me is an encapsulation of the incredible beauty that Ruby affords the programmer through ambiguity that is only to serve the human reader and writer. All of these statements we've just discussed, they're the same for the computer. It'll compile down to the same C code. They'll compile down to the same assembly code. It makes no difference whatsoever. In fact, it just makes it harder to write an interpreter. But for the human who gets to choose whether the statement comes before the conditional or the predicate method has, it's just incredible. It reads like poetry at some point.
It's also incredible that, one language designer is creating that. Guido van Rossum also. It's like one person gets to make these extremely difficult decisions because you have to think about how does that all get parsed, and you have to think about the thousands, if it's a popular language, the millions of people that end up using this and what they feel with that question mark for the if statement. What does that feel like?
That's what Matt's thought about, because he started his entire mission off a different premise than almost every programming language designer that I'd heard at least articulate their vision. That his number one goal was programmer happiness. That his number one goal was the affordances that would allow programmers to articulate code in ways that not just executed correctly, but were a joy to write and were a joy to read. And that vision is based on a fundamentally different view of humanity. There's no greater contrast between Matt's and James Gosselin, the designer of Java. I wanted to listen to James talk about the design of Java. Why was it the way it was? Why was it so rigid? And he was very blunt about it, which, by the way, I really appreciate. And I think Gosselin's done a tremendous job with Java. But his view of humanity is rather dark. His view of humanity was programmers at the average are stupid creatures. They cannot be trusted with sophisticated programming languages because they're going to shoot their foot off or their hand off. And that would be kind of inconvenient to the regional development office of a mid-tier insurance company writing code that has to last for 20 years. Now, it's actually a very Thomas Sowell view of constrained capacity in humans that I've come to appreciate much later in life, but it's also a very depressing view of programmers, that there are just certain programmers who are too dumb to appreciate code poetry.
Mhm.
They're too ignorant to learn how to write it well. We need to give them a sandbox where they just won't hurt themselves too much. Matt's went the complete opposite direction. He believes in humanity. He believes in the unlimited capacity of programmers to learn and become better. So much so that he's willing to put the stranger at his own level. This is the second part I truly appreciate about Ruby. Ruby allows you to extend base classes. You know how we just talked about 5.times is a way to iterate over a statement 5 times? That 5 is obviously a base class. It's a number. Do you know what? You can add your own methods to that. I did extensively. In Rails, we have something called active support, which is essentially my dialect of Ruby for programming web applications. And I'll give you one example. I've added a method called days to the number. So if you do 5.days, you get 5 days in seconds, because seconds is the way we set cache expiration times and other things like that. So you can say cache expires in 5.days.
Damn.
And you're going to get
That's
whatever
nice.
5 times 24 times 60 times 60 is, or whatever the math is, right? Very humanly readable. In a normal programming language, you would type out the seconds, and then you would have a little comment above it saying, this represents 5 days.
Mhm.
In Ruby, you get to write 5 days. But even better than that, Mats didn't come up with it. Mats didn't need the 5 days. I needed that because I needed to expire caches. I was allowed by Mats to extend his story with my own chapters on equal footing, such that a reader of Ruby could not tell the difference between the code Mats wrote and the code that I wrote. He trusted me as a complete stranger from Denmark who had never met to mess with his beautiful story. That level of trust is essentially unheard of. I know there are other programming languages that allow things with macros and so forth, but none do it in a way like Ruby does it. None does it with an articulated vision of humanity, a trust in humanity, like Mats does. That is the opposite end of the spectrum of Java.
Yeah, I mean, for my aesthetic sensibilities, just the way you describe 5.days, that's really pleasant to me. Like, I could see myself sitting alone, sleep deprived, and just writing that. It's an easy thing. You can write it in a long way with a comment. You can write in multiple lines. You could do, and now with AI, I'm sure it's going to generate it correctly. But there's something really pleasant about the simplicity of that. I'm not sure what that is, but you're right. There is a good feeling there, and I'm sure we'll talk about happiness from all kinds of philosophical angles. But you know, that is what happiness is made of. That little
Exactly.
good
And
feeling there.
it's the good feeling that come out of a concept compressed to its pure essence. There's nothing you can take away from that statement that's superfluous.
But see, I also want to push back a little bit because it's not, because I also programmed in Perl a bunch, just to be cool. So like it's not all about compression.
No, you can compress it too far.
Right.
Perl Gulf is a thing where you can turn programs into something that's unreadable for humans. Now, the great thing about Perl was that it came out before Ruby. Mats was a great student of Wall, was a great student of Perl, was a great student of Python and Smalltalk and Lisp. He took inspiration from all of these prior attempts at creating good programming languages and really edited down the very best bits into this. So he was able to learn from his lessons. But what I found incredible about Ruby is that here we are, 2025. Ruby has been worked on for over 30 years. And essentially the first draft is 90% of what we're still using. There was almost a sense of divine inspiration possible in wherever Mats was writing that initial version of Ruby that transcended time to such a degree that no one has still even begun to reach it. This is the other thing I always find fascinating. I generally believe in the efficient market theory, that if someone comes up with a better mousetrap or better idea, others will eventually copy them to such an extent that perhaps the original mousetrap is no longer even remembered. No one has been able to copy that essence of Ruby. They borrowed elements, and that's totally fine, but Ruby still stands taller than everyone else on these metrics, on this trust in humanity and programmers.
And we should also say, like, maybe the perfect programming language, that metric, and then there's the successful language, and those are often different. There's something wonderful about the Brendan Eich story of creating JavaScript.
Yes.
Of there's something truly beautiful about the way JavaScript took over the world. I've recently got to visit the Amazon jungle, and just one of my favorite things to do is just to watch the ants take over everything. And it's just like, it's a nice distributed system. It's a messy thing that doesn't seem to be order, but it just works. And the machinery of it.
Worse is better. I mean, that's actually the name of a pattern for in software development and other ways of it's the pattern of Linux. Linux was quantifiably worse than, I think it was Minix at the time. Other ways of it that were more cathedral, less bizarre, and it's still one. That there's something to it, that the imperfections can help something go forward. It's actually a trick I've studied to the degree that I now incorporate it in almost all open source that I do. I make sure that when I release the first version of any new thing I work on, it's a little broken. It's a little busted in ways that invite people to come in and help me. Because there's no easier way to get the collaboration of other programmers than to put something out that they know how to fix and improve.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But Ruby is somehow, or was at least, a little bit different in that regard. Not in all regards. Matt's got the ethos of the language, the design of the language just right, but the first versions of Ruby were terribly slow. It's taken, hundreds of man-years to get Ruby to be both this beautiful, yet also highly efficient and really fast.
And we should say that the thing that made you fall in love with this particular programming language is metaprogramming.
Yes. So that takes all of these elements we've just talked about and turned them up to 11. I'll explain metaprogramming real simple. Metaprogramming is essentially a version of the 5.days. You get to add keywords to the language. Active record is the part of Rails that communicates with the database. This is a system where every table in the database is represented by a class. So if we take the user example again, you do class user descends from active record base. And then the first line you can write is this. I want my users to have many posts or have many comments. Let's do that. We're making some system where users can make comments. The very next line is has _ many space : comments. Now you've set up a dependency between users and comments that will give you a whole host of access and factory methods for users to be able to own comments, to create comments, to update comments. In that line alone, has many looks like a keyword. It looks like it's part of the Ruby language. That's metaprogramming. When Rails is able to add these elements to how you define a class, and then that runs code that adds a bunch of methods to the user class, that's metaprogramming. And when metaprogramming is used in this way, we call it domain-specific languages. You take a generic language like Ruby, and you tailor it to a certain domain, like describing relationships in a database at a object level. And this is one of those early examples where you can do user has many comments, belongs _to space : account. Now you've set up a one-to-one relationship. Before we had a one-to-many relationship. Rails is rife with all these kinds of domain-specific languages where sometimes it doesn't even look like Ruby. You can't identify Ruby keywords. You can just identify what looks like keywords in its own programming language. Now, again, I know that Lisp and others also do this stuff. They just do it with the maximum amount of line noise that can ever be crammed into a programming language. And Ruby does it at a level where you cannot tell my metaprogramming from Matt's keywords and with zero line noise.
Yeah, I should say that my first love was Lisp. So there's a slow tier that you can't see.
I've actually never written any real Lisp myself.
Well, how can you judge it so harshly then?
Because I have two eyes and I can look at code, and my aesthetic sensibilities forbid me to even go much further, which is a limitation. I know. I should actually dive into Lisp because I've found that I've learned a lot just diving into, maybe I'm insulting Lisp again here, but the past of programming languages. With Smalltalk, for example, I think Smalltalk is a incredible experiment that also worked, but isn't suitable for today's programming environments.
I love that we're talking about Ruby so much and what beautiful code is and what a beautiful programming language is. So one of the things that is, I think, implied, maybe you made explicit in your descriptions there, is that Ruby is dynamic typing versus strict typing. And you have been not just saying that it's a nice thing, but that you will defend dynamic typing to the death. Like, that freedom is a powerful freedom to preserve.